Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. We have some breaking news coming out of Southern California earlier this morning as four-star defensive tackle from the state of Texas, Jaimeon Winfield, officially makes his commitment to this USC program. And really, USC just kind of continuing on the role they've been on. And there hasn't been a team, arguably, that's more hot in terms of what they're doing kind of on the in the offseason, if you will, especially after the hiring of Chad Bowden and USC. And again, Lincoln Riley's efforts to overhaul that player personnel department and bringing Chad Bowden on as GM. I mean, you're really starting to see that pay dividends in essentially allowing USC to have the type of offseason I think that USC should expect to have more consistently. I think when you look at where Lincoln Riley came into this program, they had some real immediate success with Caleb Williams, and I think that kind of covered up for, frankly, some other areas of the program that were lacking. I mean, they weren't recruiting probably the way I think USC should expect to recruit. They weren't developing players the way USC should expect to develop players. And he's made a lot of changes over the past couple of years, led by Dan Lynn last year, obviously taking over as the DC, making a bunch of coaching changes this year, and probably most importantly, really overhauling what they're doing in the player personnel departments and recruiting departments led by Chad Bowden. And again, USC shouldn't be a program that is taking a backseat to teams like Texas or Georgia or Ohio State, teams that, frankly, you could argue USC felt like they were falling behind to a little bit in those departments. And if they can kind of continue this momentum in this, just not just momentum necessarily what they're building right now, but this just kind of becomes the norm. They're that type of program that when they walk into kids' living rooms all around the country, hopefully, obviously, with a good emphasis on California like they're doing this year. But this shouldn't be a program that kind of, they're like the second fiddle to a Texas or Oklahoma or Ohio State or whoever else in the country. So, again, at the end of the day, this is the type of offseason recruiting cycle that USC is going to need to kind of put together year in and year out to get them back to probably the level, frankly, most USC fans and are like, I think they're justified, but think that this program kind of should be at in terms of being a preeminent national title contender pretty much year in and year out. So again, they're kind of doing the right things right now. It's been a relatively short spurt, if you will, but if they can continue this, and this just kind of is what USC is going forward with Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley, there's a lot to be excited for, obviously, because this is the type of offseason you want to see. So before we get too deep into what Jaimeon Winfield, I think, brings this program and kind of what it means, just wanted to thank all the USC fans. We've obviously been busy talking about this program, been really hot on the recruiting trail, had some really exciting coaching hires this offseason. We've really enjoyed being able to kind of break this down and talk about where USC might be going, not necessarily just in 2025, but obviously going forward and what they can be if they can continue kind of doing what they're doing in terms of like building this program the right way, let's say. So, getting into Jaimeon Winfield, I think the biggest thing that stands out is you've seen USC have to go to the transfer portal the past 2 years really to replace this type of guy, right? In 2024 or going into the 2024 season and then going into the 2025 season as well, you kind of didn't have your homegrown defensive tackle talent yet. And USC is starting to change that. So it's not just Jaimeon Winfield. You look at a Floyd Bucard and Jakeem Stewart in 2025. You look at Carlin Jones in 24. I think they are starting to build that defensive tackle pipeline that'll prevent them from having to be so reliant in the transfer portal to kind of get a defensive line that looks the part and is capable of being like, let's say, a championship level defensive line. But Jaimeon Winfield, I mean, he really does follow into that suit. And a guy that arguably you haven't seen USC like this type of land this type of athlete. I mean, really big physical power, probably a little bit maybe underdeveloped and a little bit raw in the technique. I don't think he's probably quite as productive as he can be if USC and Coach Henderson do a really good job with him, which, again, you like the infrastructure that USC has. I think you're starting to see defensive linemen develop a little bit better in this USC program. I even think of the way Devin Tompkins was playing down the stretch like that. He did make big strides. And is he going to be ready to play like that really physical interior defensive line this year? we'll certainly see. I think that's why Keyshawn Silver and Josh Jarrett were certainly big targets, let's say, for USC in this program. Because I look, you're probably still a little bit concerned in terms of what your homegrown recruits are going to be in 2025. But again, it does feel like it's coming. I look at Jaimeon Winfield. I look at obviously Stuart Boucard, those guys. If they can do that year in and year out and they land two of those guys, I think you put yourself in a much better position where you're not so reliant on the portal. And when you're too reliant on the portal with the defensive line room, especially in offensive line, probably as well, frankly, I think you've kind of seen that's where USC's probably fallen a little bit short the last couple of years. But again, with what they're doing in 26, both on the offensive line and on the defensive line, and being able to bring those type of skill sets, like those big physical guys who, again, aren't going to be liabilities in the run game and aren't going to be liabilities in terms of like what they're going to be able to do in terms of being disruptive along that side of the ball. So again, I think like a perfect fit, because at the end of the day, this 2026 class is not super deep in the defensive line room, but I look at where kind of USC and their ability to kind of snap up some really good players, both Samote Katoanga, obviously Jaimeon Winfield. Like, yeah, those are big lands, especially in a year that's probably not as deep there as it has been. So again, I kind of look USC's emphasis on the front seven and also on the offensive line, something that we've talked about, Lincoln Riley almost making a bit of a philosophical change in terms of how he operates this program, even going back to Oklahoma. Like, they were never elite there. I think Lincoln Riley's kind of figured out in his first couple of years in the Big Ten, if they're not really good and really competitive with the Michigans and USCs and in Oregon and Penn States along the lines of scrimmage, it'll be really hard to win consistently, even if you have really good quarterback play, because that's obviously kind of Lincoln Riley's calling card and his staple. But again, I look at bringing in Chad Bowden and kind of his experience with Notre Dame and how that program was built. Again, you don't want to lose Lincoln Riley's ability to develop first-round NFL draft quarterbacks. That's certainly a huge plus, but obviously you want to have maybe some more Notre Dame-like tendencies, some of the things that Chad Bowden was able to do with that program in terms of building up the both sides of lines of scrimmage with homegrown talent and being able to consistently develop and get really strong play from the guys you recruit from high school. So again, you just kind of look, this feels like it hopefully is the prototype for USC moving forward in terms of what their offseason looks like, where again, they're doing a really good job in the state of California. That's probably got to be number one priority. I think Chad Bowden came in and pretty much made that awfully clear that they weren't going to be backseat or like second fiddle, if you will, to Oregon in this state. That's not going to be the case anymore. And in so far, they're kind of making good on that. They are landing and getting the interest from the guys in the state that they need to. But also that doesn't mean that you don't want to be able to go into states of Georgia, obviously Texas, and be able to land big time recruits out of there. So I just look, being able to land really good offensive defensive linemen, something USC did feel like they were struggling to do in the prior years. I think they're on a really good track in terms of like getting themselves back to being a much more consistent competitor, where they're probably not so reliant on having a great quarterback in a given year. Like, frankly, Lincoln Riley has been a little bit arguably reliant on that throughout the course of his career. So having a better team, if you will, I think puts USC in a better position to just be generally competitive and not have kind of dips when your quarterback's not great. Because even this year, it's not, I don't think they were getting terrible quarterback play necessarily. Like, a lot of teams could have won with what USC was getting. They were just at a place where the team behind the quarterback just probably wasn't good enough. But I look, this type of class, I think, fixes that issue that USC's kind of run into. So again, if they can kind of continue this, hopefully have a solid year in 2025, don't necessarily think you need to win the Big Ten or do anything crazy, but I think you want to have a good competitive year. But if you can continue what they're kind of doing in the offseason and building this team out through the high school recruiting, especially along the lines of scrimmage, I think there's a lot to be excited for USC fans, obviously. And we've been talking about it. Certainly will continue to talk about it. So Yeah, if you guys can continue to enjoy the channel, I know we have a ton of we get a ton of USC support, and it really does mean the world. Yeah, we certainly love all of it and love all the interactions. So thank you guys very much. And with that, I will take it out.